Alright, welcome back to another episode of For the Classical Guitarist. In this video, we are talking about the guitars of our beloved Julian Bream. Let's get started. So for this video, I'm going to break it up into three sections. Section 1 is going to be the guitars he had as a child, as well as going into his young, early adult career. Section 2 is going to be the guitars he had once he was an adult and getting his career really started. And Section 3 is going to be the guitars that you're probably the most familiar with if you're a Julian Bream fan. So let's start off with the guitars he had when he was pretty young. So the first guitar that I can find is one by the Spanish luthier Salvador Ibáñez. Now, this one is one that we don't really know when it was made, but we're guessing it was made probably in the early 1900s. It's believed that Julian Bream got this guitar in around 1944 when he was about 11 years old, and then he played it for a little bit, and then he even gave a full concert on it when he was 13 years old. So for any of you guys who play electric guitar out there, just remember, Julian Bream started off on an Ibanez as well, just because of the accents and all, it was pronounced a little differently, but he did still play an Ibanez. The next popular guitar from around this time was the Maccaferri guitar. Now, we're unsure of when this guitar was actually made and when Bream even got it, but we can guess that it was sometime around 1946, and the reason why is because Julian Bream used it in a public performance in that same year. Now, believe it or not, unfortunately, this guitar was actually the thing that made Julian Bream lose one of his concerts. After that concert I mentioned a little while ago, which was kind of almost like a trial concert for Bream, he was actually asked and expected to do a full recital. However, the promoters didn't want him to use a guitar that seemed kind of untraditional, we could say. And because of that, they actually canceled the whole entire thing. And the last of his early guitars that I want to talk about is actually a guitar by C.F. Martin. And yes, that is the same C.F. Martin that makes Martin guitars today. Julian actually concertized with this guitar from 1948 all the way until 1952, and he gave a pretty big recital in Wigmore Hall in 1951 with this guitar. Today, this guitar of course is in a private collection as being a pretty monumental item in not only Martin's history, but as well as the guitar history overall. But let's move on to the guitars that you guys might be more familiar with. So when looking at the guitars in his adult life, this list will make any guitar player jealous. You're going to see names that some players only dream of even having one of them, and Julian Bream, being Julian Bream, had multiple of them. Let's start off simple with some Hausers. Over the course of his career, he was known to have played on 5 different Hauser Is and 1 Hauser II. In the order of when he got them, here's a quick list. He had a 1928 Hauser I, a 1947 Hauser I, a 1957 Hauser II, a 1950 Hauser I, a 1944 Hauser I, and last but not least, a 1940 Hauser I. Now, if hearing about all of those Hausers wasn't enough to make you envious, he also is known for playing a handful of Jose Romanillos guitars. He had a Jose Romanillos from 1969, from 1973, one from 1981, and the last one he had was from 1985. And the last notable guitar that he had would be by Gary Southwell. He had one from the 2000s, one from the late 1900s, and then also one from 2008. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. That's a lot of guitars and a lot of really expensive guitars. But it doesn't end there. Those are just the ones that he had a handful of the same exact maker of. But some other notable ones that I wanted to mention was he played on 2 different Konos, 4 different Robert Bouchet, 3 David Rubios. He played on 2 different Friedrichs, Hernandez y Aguado. He had multiple Ramirez guitars. He had a guitar by Brian Cohen, and believe it or not, he even had a Matthias Stammen double top that he was said to have. He never played anywhere with it because that would be a little bit too weird even for Bream, but he did have one. Now before we get into the big 3, there is one more guitar I want to talk about. This is one by the maker Simon Ombridge, and it's from 2009 and most likely bought by Julian Bream in 2009. Why this guitar I found particularly interesting is because this is the last guitar that Julian Bream purchased and or received before he passed. And at this point, Julian Bream was not really concertizing, not really recording, not really doing much besides maybe a few things here and there. So this was his main practice guitar. Of course, he loves some of the guitars I mentioned earlier, and some of them are ones that he played probably when he did do a few performances back then. But again, this was the last one that he chose to will and get, so I'm sure it held a special place in his heart. Now, if you're like me and a pretty big Julian Bream fan, there's some guitars on that list that you know are the ones that everybody knows as Julian Bream's guitars. So let's start off with his Gary Southwell guitar. This guitar was most likely made in the late 1900s or the early 2000s, and that's probably when Julian Bream first acquired it. This guitar is actually a replica of a Hauser I that Julian Bream was gifted from Rose Augustine. And although to some I'm sure this was no Hauser, to Julian Bream this was as close as it could get, so close that he often would times use it as a replacement for his Hauser. He had so much trust in this guitar that it was even taken as a backup to his final recital at the Wigmore Recital Hall, along with, of course, the Hauser I. Alright, so moving on to the guitar that most Julian Bream fans are probably familiar with, that would be Julian Bream's 1940 Hauser I. So this guitar was actually loaned to him from Rose Augustine, and he used it for a handful of recordings. Not all of them, but just to name a few, it can be heard on To the Edge of Dream, featuring music by Rodrigo Takemitsu and Arnold. The Nocturnal, featuring music by Britton, Lutoslawski, Martin, Takemitsu, and Brouwer. Sonata, featuring music by Paganini and Castelnuovo Tedesco. Like I said earlier, this guitar was also used in his final recital at the Wigmore Hall in 2001. If you want to hear and see this guitar in action, I would highly recommend to check out the DVD My Life in Music featuring Julian Bream, of course, where he plays it on the Source Study in B minor as well as the Nocturnal. Now, like I said, this guitar was actually loaned to Julian Bream. It wasn't one that he was given or one that he bought himself. But it was loaned to him through the Augustine Foundation estate, of course, because of Julian Bream's connection to Rose Augustine. And he used this guitar for 20 years, so much so that even though it wasn't his, it's pretty much considered Julian Bream's guitar. And if you want to see this guitar in person, in real life, today, you can go ahead and check out the Metropolitan Museum of Art and see this guitar up close. And finally, what many consider to be Bream's #1 guitar, his 1973 Jose Romanillos guitar. This one is so famous because it was probably used on the most amount of Julian Bream's recordings out of any guitar that he's had. And as you've seen so far, he's had a lot. What makes this guitar unique is that it was built specifically for him, and it was actually made to be a copy of a Hauser I from 1930. If you're interested, this guitar can be heard on these recordings: Julian John and Julian John II together again, Giuliani and Soar, Rodrigo and Berkeley, Music of Spain Volume 4, Music of Spain Volume 5, Music of Spain Volume 8, Dedication, Music of Spain Volume 7, Guitarra, and the Romantic Guitar. So between these three guitars, if you've listened to a handful of Julian Bream, I'm sure that you have heard at least one of them. How many guitars did he have? So from my calculations, at least the ones that I saw on my research, he has had 39 concert level guitars. On top of that, he also had 10 different student guitars. So over the course of Julian Bream's lifetime in his career as a guitarist, from when he was starting out until his passing, he had a total of 49 different guitars. Not at the same time, I'm sure, but again, imagine having at your life 49 concert level guitars. For me, that's just, I don't know. I can't even imagine what that would be like. Alright, so that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still here, go ahead and leave a comment down below letting me know what guitar player you want me to talk about their guitars next. If you're new here and you liked what you saw, I hope that you would consider giving this video a like, as well as subscribing to the channel to support more classical guitar content. Anyway, until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.